Many people are growing and preserving their own foods, maybe to save money, maybe to support local growers, maybe so you know exactly what ingredients are used in the food you prepare and serve to your family. Whatever the reason, it's important you use safe food preservation methods, so in the long run your food is safe to eat. Hi, I'm Linnette Goard, Field Specialist in Food Safety with Ohio State University Extension. And today we're going to be making and canning pickles. Well, to start out, you need to choose cucumbers. And you can get those cucumbers in your backyard garden or at a local farm market. There is a difference in the cucumbers that you might choose to have. These are pickling cucumbers. And you'll see that they're smaller. When you cut them open, the seeds are going to be smaller, and they're much better to use in making pickles. These are what we call in-hand or eating cucumbers, and when you cut those open, they have a much larger seed, and they're not suited really for pickling. So you want to choose a pickling cucumber. The other kind of ingredients that you'll need, because our cucumbers are low acid, we need to add an acid to them to make them high enough of an acid to water bath can them and to safely do that. So we're going to add, we're going to use a canning or a pickling salt. We're going to use vinegar, and that raises that acidic content. And we're going to use our pickling spices. You can purchase those spices all in one container, or you can choose to mix your own and use celery seed, mustard seed, and an allspice. The other things that we'll need is your canning jars. And we're going to choose to use pint jars today. These are a canning type jar, a mason jar, and they're a thick quality. You don't want to use that canning jar or jar that you come from the store, like an old pickle jar or an old mayonnaise jar. They could break when you put them into the canner. And then we're going to use a two-piece lid. You have an inner lid and then an outer rim that we're going to use for those. So to get started today, we're going to wash our cucumbers. Now that our cucumbers are washed, we're ready to get started. And the first thing you want to do is cut them for your jars. We take a cucumber. We can leave the stem on if we want to, or we can cut it off. I'm probably going to cut those off today because I'm going to make slices for jars. The blossom end you always want to remove, and take at least a 1/4 inch off the end of that, because if you leave that blossom end on, that's what makes your pickles soft. And so by cutting that off, you're taking the enzyme away that softens your cucumbers. So we're going to start cutting them for the jars. And make about a 1/4 inch slices. Okay, we finished cutting our cucumbers. The last bit to go in our bowl. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our cucumbers and we're going to cover them with pickling salt or canning salt. We use a pickling or a canning salt. It is non-iodized because we don't want the iodine in there. And it's a specialized salt that doesn't get cloudy or briny during the process. So we're going to sprinkle that over the top of our cucumbers. What this does is it pulls some of that liquid out of there. It keeps our cucumbers crisp, and it'll help keep our pickles crisp when we go to can them. So we're going to take this and we're going to put it in the refrigerator for 3 to 4 hours. Before putting your cucumbers in the refrigerator, you want to cover them with a layer of ice. This will help them remain crisp. The next thing we want to do is go ahead and make our pickling brine. And we're going to start with vinegar. add sugar. We're making sweet pickles. And our pickling spices. We're going to mix this up, and then we're going to take it back to the stove and heat it to boiling. Okay, after our cucumbers have been in the refrigerator for about 3 hours, we're going to drain them. And then they're ready to pack into our jars. We're using pint jars today and a raw pack method, which means we take the raw cucumbers and put them into our jars. And we pack them pretty tightly because they will shrink as they process. And we want to pack them within a 1/2 inch of the top of the jar. We have our boiling brine, and that's going to be the next thing that we do is put the brine over our cucumbers that are in the jars. And to do that, we're going to use some canning tools. We have a funnel. We have what we call a bubble freer, and a bubble freer is just a plastic, we call it a plastic wand, and this goes down the side of your jar to get the bubbles out. And then this one actually has a jagged edge that measures the head space, and the head space is the amount of space between the top of the food and the top of the jar. And so if you remember, I said a 1/2 inch head space is what we want, and we'll measure that on the side of our jar. The other tools we have are a magnetic wand, which we'll use in a minute for our lids, and then a jar lifter. And the jar lifter is used to put our jars in and out of the boiling water bath pot. And we have our water bath pot on the stove with the water getting ready to boil. So let's put our broth into our jars. And again, we're going to fill this within a 1/2 inch of the top. We'll fill it, and then we're going to use our bubble freer and go down the side of our jars and get the extra bubbles out of there. If we don't do that, we'll end up with more food and less liquid. And we want to make sure that we have liquid to the top of our jar. Okay, now we're ready for our lids. Before we put our lids on, we want to wipe the top of our jars because we don't want any food or a sugary syrup between our jar top and our lid. We want to make a really good seal. And we had our lids on the stove. They're in a pan of water just simmering, and what that does is it softens that inner seal and makes a good seal when we do the canning process. And this is our magic wand, and it keeps you from burning your fingers. And then we're going to put the jar lid or the jar rim on. When we put this jar ring on, we put it just until it catches, and then fingertip tight. We don't want to crank that lid on there because we'll put a bind between the lid and the jar ring, and it could cause it not to seal. We processed our pickles in a hot boiling water bath for 10 minutes. Then we let them set for 12 to 24 hours. When that process is done, then you can check and make sure that they're safe to keep. And you push in the center of each of the jar lids. If they stay down, that means they're good. Label them and date them. Most of our canned goods are good to keep for a year. Make sure that when you're canning foods that you use a USDA approved recipe. And those can be found along with the recipe that we have for today's pickles at fcs.osu.edu and click on the Home Food Preservation tab.